Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Commander's Forge. My name is Andy Bentley, and the Forge is an area for me to talk about Magic, Commander, and anything else while I try and bring this whole mental health thing back to where it's supposed to be. Spoiler alert, it's not working. Anyway, today I want to talk about the other side of being a brewer. So, yes, I am constantly bombarded with ideas for new decks. And that means I have a steady rotation of decks. But what happens when you've played a deck a few times and it just didn't quite work? Well, you either scrap it or you try to rework it. And I tend to fall into the latter, which is to say I like to rework decks. I like to sit down, look at it, see what I can change out and where that will take the deck. So today I want to talk about Doran the Siege Tower. Doran is a 0/5 Treefolk Shaman for Abzan, otherwise known as Black, Green, and White. And he says each creature assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So most people see this and they go, oh, so just big butts. I did not. I looked at this and went, hey, I can put all of my tree folk into this deck. Because A, he's a tree folk. Tree folk on average have bigger butts than they do attacks. And yeah, so I actually built this deck back in like 2015, and I had it for a couple years, and then I kind of tore it apart to put pieces elsewhere, and I relatively recently decided to put it back together, and I did, and it's missing something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the cards that I'm looking to take out and what I'm looking to replace them with. So for the most part, that's what I'm doing. So I have a stack of like 15 cards that I know are probably on the cutting block for when I get the new cards in. So let's just quickly go over what they are, and then I will go into what we're looking to replace them with. First up, we have Wickerbow Elder, 3 in a green, for a 4/4 Treefolk Shaman. Comes into play with a -1/-1 counter on it. You can pay a green, remove the counter to destroy an artifact or enchantment. This is a good card, particularly if you have a way to keep throwing -1 counters on it, and I don't, so it's just kind of a generic removal spell, basically. Next up, we have Thorntooth Witch, which is 5 and a black for a 3/4 Treefolk Shaman. Whenever you play a Treefolk spell, you may have target creature get +3/-3 till end of turn. That's, again, some removal, and we don't really want to use the reverse side because we're trying to make big butts. Next up, we have Gnarlroot Pallbearer, 4 green for a 5/5 Treefolk Druid with Trample. Enters the battlefield, target creature gets +X/+X till end of turn, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Just didn't seem to really mesh with what the deck was trying to do. Next up, we have Dungrove Elder, 2 in a green for a star Treefolk with Hexproof. Power and toughness are each equal to the number of forests you control. If Hexproof was Trample, I think this would probably still make the cut. There are other Boggles lists where Dungrove Elder just makes more sense. But continuing on, we have Tilling Treefolk, 2 in a green for a 1/3 Treefolk Druid. When it comes into play, you may return up to 2 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. It's just not really doing enough, and I don't actually have a ton of ways to put lands into my graveyard, so it just didn't make a whole lot of sense staying in there. Next up, we have Lumberknot. 2 green for a 1/1 tree folk with hexproof. Whenever a creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Lumberknot. So again, this works better in a place where you want hexproof creatures, but also works better in a place where you have some kind of meat grinder to put your creatures into, so you can just make Lumberknot absolutely massive. Now we're going to get into more of the place order cards that I put in that weren't creatures, that were just kind of there to make the deck whole, and I don't think I need anymore. So first up, we have Dromoka's Command. A green and a white for an instant. Choose 2. Prevent all damage. Target instant or sorcery spell would deal this turn. Target player sacrifices an enchantment. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Or target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. Again, all fine modes. They just not really what the deck is trying to do overall. Next up, we have Harmonize, which is 2 green for a sorcery to draw 3 cards. Ancient Cravings, which is 3 and a black for a sorcery. You draw 3 cards and lose 3 life. And Ambition's Cost, 3 and a black sorcery. You draw 3 cards, you lose 3 life. Again, they were really placeholder cards. Well, we do like drawing cards. There are other ways to do that, and we don't necessarily need to stack in a bunch of sorceries to get that done. After that, well, we did put in some stuff to like interact with our graveyard. I just don't think they're that necessary. So, Nature Spiral, 1 and a green for a sorcery. Return a permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. Revive the Shire, does much the same. 1 and a green, sorcery. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, and then create a food token. So it just, they don't seem that necessary. This deck isn't really trying super hard. This is one of those decks you pull out when everyone just wants to have some fun. The last 3 on this list that are coming out are Crystal Carapace, which is 3 and a green for an enchantment aura. Enchant a creature. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3 and has ward 2, and it has cycling for 2. Court of Bounty is 2 green for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you're the monarch, instead you can put a creature card or a land card onto the battlefield. And Door of Destiny is 4 mana for an artifact. When it comes into play, choose a creature type. Whenever you play a spell of that type, put a charge counter on Door of Destinies, and creatures you control of that type get +1/+1 for each charge counter on Door of Destinies. So, well, yes, that is very much a typal card. I feel like it's better used somewhere where the average mana cost of my creatures isn't, 5. Now, there is also some lands that I want to put in, but I'm not entirely sure what lands I would cut yet, although I am leaning towards the, what set are they from? Dominaria and Kaldheim, I believe? The ones that have the basic land typing, but, always enter tapped. So, like, Radiant Grove is a plains and a forest, but it enters tapped. Woodland Chasm is a snow, swamp, and forest, but it enters the battlefield tapped. Stuff like that. Like, there is no chance for it to come in to play untapped. You know what I mean? So I'm going to take a quick break, and then when we get back, I will talk about the cards that I'm looking to put into this deck. I will be right back. And we're back. Now, I will start off this section with talking about some of the lands that I'm looking to put in, since we were just talking about, the lands I want to take out. So, first up, we have the Hushwood Verge. This is a land from Duskmourn. It can either tap for a green or tap for a white, but activate only if you control a forest or a plains. So, again, this is arguably much better than those other two lands we were talking about. And it just... Anyway, moving on. Next up, we have the Shattered Sanctum, which is a land. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Taps for a white or a black. So, again, can enter tapped, but it has that caveat that says, hey, if this is the third land you play, it will enter untapped. You know what I mean? Another land on that list is the Overgrown Farmland. That's a land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands, and that taps for a green or a white. But I think that's enough about lands. Let's talk about creatures that I found that I want to put into this deck. First up, we have the Ancient Lumberknot. 2, a green and a black for a 1/4 tree folk. And it says that each creature you control with toughness greater than its power assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So this is a backup to my commander. It just does the same thing. For the most part, not all of them, some of them have equal power and toughness, but for the most part, their toughness is going to outclass their power nearly every time. Next up, we have the Canker Abomination. 2 and then 2 hybrid green-black for a 6/6 Treefolk Horror. He enters the battlefield, choose an opponent. It enters the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it for each creature that player controls. So if we can sneak this in against a control player that's only playing basically with their commander and might not have them out yet, it's just a 4-mana 6/6. Yeah, that's it. That's all I got for him. The one creature that actually made me put this deck back together, I realized was not in this deck. And that is Kolfanor the Last U. 3 in Abzan, so white, black, green, for a 3/7 Treefolk Shaman with Vigilance and Reach. Whenever Kolfanor or another creature you control dies, return up to one other target creature card with lesser toughness from your graveyard to your hand. So he just gives us some extra recursion. The next one does not start as a creature, but does get there eventually. That is the Dormant Grove. 3 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then, if that creature has toughness 6 or greater, transform it. It comes back as Gnarled Grove Strider. It is a 3/6 Treefolk with Vigilance, and says other creatures you control have Vigilance. The next up in the list I've got here is Fangorn Tree Shepherd. 4 green for a 4/10 Treefolk. And he says that Treefolk you control have Vigilance. Whenever one or more Treefolk you control attack, you add twice that much green mana, and you don't lose unspent green mana as steps and phases end. So you can bank a ton of mana and then use it in your second main phase. That's just good. Now, the next one I have in this list is one that I could have swore was already in the list, but apparently I must not have found my copy to put in here. That is Sapling of Kolfanor. 3 and then 2 hybrid green-black for a 2/5 Treefolk Shaman. The sapling is indestructible. And whenever the sapling attacks, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, you gain life equal to that card's toughness, lose life equal to its power, and then put it into your hand. And then again, because for the most part, our toughnesses are much larger than our powers, we will net more life than we lose. Now, there was one other creature that originally was in this deck, but now I can't seem to find my copy. That's the Timber Protector. Timber Protector is 4 and a green for a 4/6 Treefolk Warrior. Other Treefolk you control get +1/+1, and other Treefolk and forests you control are indestructible. So you can see why this card is actually fairly important for this deck, and I need to find my copy or pick up a new one and slap it into this deck. Okay, after that, there are 3 more creatures that I'm looking to put into this deck. The first one of them is 6. 2 and a green for a 2/4 Treefolk with reach. Whenever 6 attacks, mill 3 cards. You can put a land card from among them into your hand as long as it's your turn. Not only permanent cards in your graveyard have retrace, so you can cast it by discarding a land in addition to its other costs. So this is a form of getting lands out. This is another form of getting things out of our graveyard. It just does all the things we want it to do. Next up we have Warden of the Woods, 4 white for a 5/7 Treefolk with Vigilance. And whenever it becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw 2 cards. So that's just a way we're going to be drawing cards now, you know. And the final creature in this list is Eudora Grave Gardener. It is 4 and a green for a 5/5 Treefolk Druid. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may return it to the battlefield face down under its owner's control. It's a forest land. It has no other types or abilities. It is just a forest. But that's, again, like a form of recursion. It turns our dead creatures into ramp, essentially. Now, there are, a few other things that I'm looking to add, like asceticism. 3 green for an enchantment. Creatures you control have hexproof, and then you can pay 1 and a green to regenerate a creature. Heroic Intervention, which is 1 and a green for an instant. Creatures you control gain hexproof and indestructible till end of turn. Just the things you would expect to see in these colors. So I guess the thing I kind of want to leave you with here is don't be afraid to change a deck. Believe me, I understand it can be rough if you're, keeping your deck lists online, because I've definitely got old deck lists that I haven't updated yet, and I'm currently working on getting my stuff onto Moxfield whenever I have the time and or energy to do so. But don't be afraid to just sit down and go, hey, this isn't working like I want it to, but I don't necessarily want to take it apart. You can just rework it. Take it back to the drawing board. There's no shame in doing something like that. But with that, I'm going to call this here, and I'm just going to say bye-bye, and I will see you next time. Thank you for listening. All of my links can be found in my link tree in the description below. I would like to thank Ian Foss and Cody Mulphy of the band The Crypt for allowing me to use music for my opening and ending. along with Nate and Erica Jacobs for making my original logo. And I would also like to thank Christina McNichol for creating my new logo. And I'll see you next time.